Hey Bob, how you doing?
Hi Eric, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good. I think we're live, so maybe we should get started here. But first of all, thanks everybody for dialing into another episode of Chopping It Up by Green Cabbage. Exciting guest with us today here on the Green Cabbage LinkedIn Live show, and we've got a lot of interesting topics to cover. So typically we focus just on indirect technology. We will talk a little bit about that. But with Bob's background, and I'll have him introduce himself here in a minute, we wanted to broaden this up a little bit more about talking about some of the challenges we see in procurement, how procurement's evolved in the last 10 to 15 years, why the criticality of it's just not pricing, but the business and legal terms are really instrumental into securing the best contracts. Some things called audits, some things called suppliers that could be you could be struggling with, and then we're just going to chop it up. But I'm Eric Cunningham, the founder, chief client officer here at Green Cabbage, and today I'm honored to have one of our Cabbage board members on with me today, Mr. Bob Murphy. But just so we're clear, we have a couple Bob Murphys, right? So we have a Bob Murphy from the West Coast and a Bob Murphy from the East Coast, but delighted to have Bob Murphy here from North Carolina with me today. So, Bob, let me turn it over to you real quick, a quick introduction, and then let's chop it up. How's that sound?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Eric. And yeah, I'm the Bob Murphy from Scotland who lives in North Carolina. Little bit about me. I recently retired from IBM in March of this year, March the 1st, after almost 46 years. So I joined IBM in 1978. IBM sponsored me to be and get a master's degree in manufacturing sciences and engineering. So I'm an engineer at heart, and through my career with IBM, I ventured into many subjects: development manager, supply chain management, material operations, procurement, category manager, category director, sourcing director, managing our OEM relationships. In 2014, I became IBM's chief procurement officer and also managed our supply chain transformation and operations until I retired, including the execution of a business process outsourcing arm of the consultancy division of IBM. For my sins, I also had accounts payable and global logistics. And so I've done quite a lot of things with one of the best companies in the world. And so now I'm retired and I get a chance to spend time with people like Eric and have a lot of fun. So looking forward to chopping it up, but I don't want to be chopped up, Eric. So let's see what questions you've got here.
No, no. Did you have your haggis this morning, or no haggis in North Carolina?
Haggis is good for you. It's hard to get it in North Carolina. You can get it in Scotland. I'd recommend to all our listeners or viewers here, if you ever go to Scotland, don't listen to what everyone says. Have the haggis. It's fantastic.
Good. So I think based on the introduction, our audience should understand there's a lot of scar tissue over the years and a lot of tribal knowledge that hopefully you guys can walk away with today. The goal of this session is for you to walk away with something that you might not have learned before and to put it into action. So let's just get right into it. Let's talk about, so you and I talked earlier today, and both of us have been attending a lot of, I call it C-level conferences. So we've got a lot of chief procurement officers or CFOs or CIOs, C-level conferences. And I think we're hearing a lot of the same consistent challenges that's going on out in procurement today. But let me turn it over to you to kind of paraphrase some of the challenges that you're hearing and you see also in the procurement landscape.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. So very timely. In July, I went to Maastricht and was with around 50 CPOs from all of the largest companies in the world at the Procurement Leaders Ovation Summit. So that was full of energy, full of discussions, guest speakers, and looking at what is in the future for procurement and where we need to help our businesses. And I think we probably realize over the last 10 years, the procurement function has been moving from, let me call it, transactional activities and moving into much more of value creation for the company. And that lens and that kind of direction is where we need to continue to head this function. As procurement becomes ever more important and more strategic to CEOs and to the boards, there are a lot of new challenges that are being faced. So let me talk on some of them. And this was where I think, Eric, we see the future here collectively. I mean, I think number one is de-risking and future-proofing our supply chain. I mean, there are many risks and many more risks. I mean, from financial, geopolitical, climate, we've now got brand reputational risk and making sure we protect our brand image. And even more importantly, and what seems to be becoming much more recurring is cybersecurity. And I think, like every day you look and there are attacks and ransomware attacks and all of these things. So very, very critical for procurement and CPOs to de-risk our future, protect our companies and drive that de-risking future proofing process. Also, and I think on everybody's lips right now, and then if you look at all of the consultant inputs and all of the surveys that are done, every single CPO and CEO is talking about data, big data, AI, large language models, generative AI, and how do we harness that? How do we get our people trained on that? How do we leverage that? How do we keep up with everyone else? I guess you all saw NVIDIA yesterday, very strong earnings, but supply continuity issues with their new chipset. So their stock actually went down. So lots of challenges, but AI and the future AI, how do we handle that? How do we monopolize on the big data? How do we get more data? How do we make that more endemic? Very, very key challenge. And then on everyone's agenda is ESG. I mean, how do we protect our planet? How do we do the right things with our employees? How do we practice diversity correctly? How do we have a governance structure in place that optimizes all of that? And what I would say lastly here, Eric, although I'm sure there are a few other things we could add, but we only get 30 minutes here, is, and I call this, some of you may have read Jeffrey Archer's book, it's called First Amongst Equals. And let me tell you, as procurement organizations, the C-suite, the CEOs are looking for us to drive best value, best pricing, best terms and conditions, and give us fair market value for what we do. We need to take savings and bring them to the bottom line. That's the fastest way to increase margins, and that's the underlying requirement of every sourcing and procurement team that I've ever met. So those I would characterize, Eric, are kind of 3 or 4 of the key areas that we should be driving as CPOs and that companies like Green Cabbage need to help us enable.
No, that's great context and great way to set the table. I think I'm hearing the same, right? There's certainly the same areas. I love how you framed it up. Procurement becoming proactive value creators. And, in the business is starting to see the success of what procurement can bring to the bottom line. But there's 2 obviously problems with that. Number one, or actually a high level, we haven't met a procurement team that's overstaffed, right? So now the business is starting to say, oh, wow, I'm asking these folks to do a lot of work, but do we have the right resources? Do we have enough resources? And by the way, do they have the right expertise, right? So you mentioned AI, part of it as well, too. And it's certainly game changing for the way we're doing stuff. Some companies are adopting it much faster than others. Some companies are, hey, let's sit back and wait to see where this really takes us to, right? But really, what does AI give us? It gives us, for the most part, accurate information faster, right? So that's what people need. And that's where the market intelligence comes into play here as well, too. But I love how you framed it, the proactive value creators, and I think it's really what procurement is really delivering to the business. And like you, I've been to these conferences, one last week in Atlanta, and it was just it was specific to technology, Bob, but it's how do we give our business better information in advance to things like a supplier risk situation. So we'll talk about that here in a minute. Let's transition into and again, you've seen this. We were talking a little bit this morning about how did you know if you were getting a good deal 15 years ago? Let's go back 15 years ago, and what are the things that companies would do to say, am I getting the best price from this mega supplier? We don't need to mention any specific suppliers, but am I getting the best price from this mega supplier? Because people in your position probably didn't spend a lot of time on tail spend. You're out there looking at the bulk of your large spend. So how would you look at it that then? And then let's talk about really where we're at today.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think we're all aware of the explosion of data. And, there's all sorts of facts around the data. But I think I read recently that like every 1 to 2 years now, we're creating more data than has been created since the inception of time, and we started recording things with videos, with data on the internet, with Instagrams. Data is everywhere. So what I would say to you, Eric, is 15 years ago, we probably did a lot of very myopic sourcing decisions based on very limited knowledge. We sometimes call it market intelligence. And as part of our 7-step, sourcing process, we did try and understand the industry. We tried to understand the suppliers, but we typically relied on maybe RFIs to do some surveying and then RFQs to get that data. We didn't have a lot of market intelligence. We didn't have all that data that you talked about, all of the AI, all of the inputs that we could now leverage. So I would put it back on you, Eric, and say, hey, companies like Green Cabbage, and as we talked about, with the limited resources and procurement teams, I think they need to leverage partnerships and technology companies who can help them with that data, with that knowledge, with those insights, and proactively letting those limited teams know where they should be at through that competitive process. So maybe you can explain how Green Cabbage can do that and take the workload off of all of the procurement teams, and I'm sure there's a lot of them on this webcast who would love to hear that.
Yeah, I'm going to take you back to memory lane real quick, though. As a supplier, I think Bob, I worked for IBM, I worked at Oracle, Microsoft, and as a supplier, I'd walk into an account, maybe here in Pittsburgh, which is a very small. That's where our headquarters is, here in Pittsburgh, but a very small city. And what my job was to do is find out, is this customer telling this customer what discount they got, right? Because as much as people might think that there's a standard discount level across these mega suppliers, I hate to tell you, it's not the case at all. And as much as you think that you're spending more money, or you're buying more SKUs, or you're buying more volume or users, employees, and you think you're getting a better deal, that's not the case at all. Okay, deals are done at the P&L level, at the business industry level of each of these mega suppliers. They've got a retail business unit, they got a financial services business unit, a tech, and they all run their own business. They all have their own approval processes, and they have standard discounts and non-standard discounts. They have standard terms and non-standard terms. So why I tell you all this stuff is because we fast forward to where we're at today. And that's what we call market intelligence. And I'm not going to do an infomercial on Green Cabbage, because those of the people that are on the call here, they're not here to get a sales pitch today. But having rich market intelligence to understand you're in this industry, you're in this geography, you're spending X amount on this particular SKU, and having a comparison gives you 80% of your time back faster and gives you a starting point, right? In addition to that, you need to have the business and legal terms too. So getting the best price, there's a lot of companies out there to do benchmarking, but they're losing their market share every day to companies like Green Cabbage, because that's all they're doing is pricing, right? So having business and legal terms It's just so important, specifically when you talk about you're bringing risk into the procurement life cycle.
Yeah.
Because that's all I heard when I was in New York City presenting at this Sources on the Street. It's all about risk, right? We'll talk about that in a minute. And then it's about what levers do I have? Like, how do you, as a customer, prepare leverage? Because right now, in many cases, the supplier owns the leverage. It's your job to regain the narrative and control leverage. But that all happens in market intelligence. And there's firms out there that have been doing this stuff for a long time. But the disruptive scrappiness and the innovative piece of it through platform and tech-enabled services is really where Green Cabbage stands apart. So let's talk a little. We got evolution of procurement. Let's talk a little bit about. I think we're 17 minutes in, Bob.
Yeah.
Let's talk about business and legal terms. Okay, and the importance of business and legal terms from your perspective, and then I'm happy to add mine as well.
Yeah, I think it's probably the most.
Okay, by the way, can I frame it up in this thing? We hear a lot, and I think you and I talked about this too, contract performance scoring.
Yeah.
So let's talk about legal and business terms in the context of contract. When after you sign the contract, I don't know how many contracts that you've managed. I'm assuming thousands a year, right? But again, we don't need to get into the details. It's not appropriate. But think about the contracts. What happens after you sign this contract? Who's managing those contracts after you sign them? And why is it important with the business and legal terms?
Yeah, I firstly I'd say in my opinion, the business and legal terms are even more important than the price. Price is extremely important, obviously. We need to get fair market value, we need to get a competitive price. And in procurement, it's about relative pricing. You mentioned that earlier. Every procurement executive, leader, category manager wants to get the best deal. And so one of the things that I guess Green Cabbage does is they can triangulate that with all of the data they have. And as you said, and it's a critical word for procurement, that gives our buyers and our sourcing teams leverage. And leverage is really important. But it's really also important to have the right terms and conditions through indemnifications, through warranties, through data privacy. What is best out there? And how can we and how can companies like Green Cabbage help, sourcing teams? As you mentioned, they've got limited resources, limited time, and they've got oodles of data and information flying about everywhere. So they want proactive inputs on best practices, on best terms to actually start the process. And then they can build on that with even more leverage and get better terms. So I would say it's not an either or world, Eric. It's an and world. We want best pricing. We want the best terms to protect us. And we want to make sure we've got risk minimization and focus on the awards that we do. Now, one last point that you mentioned, which is about contracts and how we manage them. I think that is a massive opportunities for a lot of companies, because we sign contracts and hopefully they don't lie in drawers. But when people are really busy, guess what happens? They're in drawers. We're not monitoring the performance, or maybe with a monitor, if there's an issue with a certain supplier or something, we may get into that. But what we need to be having is an endemic performance measurement evaluation, and also to look at the key outcomes that should be coming from that contract, evaluating them, because I think doing the award and giving the business is the tip of the iceberg. Actually managing that contract and making sure that all of the benefits that we took a lot of time to negotiate and actually come to fruition is much more impactful, and it's probably something that a lot of companies should do a lot more of. And hopefully Green Cabbage can help those companies with that venture, Eric.
Yeah, I mean, it's the terminology from the transition from an on-prem management, a contract, an MSA as an example, or an OLSA, or whatever the case may be. now into these CSAs, cloud services agreements, the language is significantly different. I'll give you an example. So you talk about contract performance scoring, and we have a client that we negotiated a cloud deal for them, and they got rebalancing language in it. And those of you that don't know what rebalancing language is if you have multiple SKUs and you've got multiple users and you're 1 year into your ERP deployment, as an example, maybe users move from this SKU to this SKU. Typically, what you would do is pay a true up, right? You get a knock at the door, sales rep says, hey, yeah, Bob, you're over by 30 users. I'm going to send you an invoice. By the way, you don't have a price hold, so you're going to pay list price, hypothetically, right?
Yeah.
Right? Then you negotiate, right? So having notifications in a platform like One Workspace, which does this for customers, to tell you that, oh, by the way, your rebalancing language is about, you have 3 more months to rebalance your contract language, gives you that ability, because nobody can keep track of all this stuff. People leave and all the tribal knowledge leaves. That person signed the contract, they leave, they don't know this. Now it's value creation back to the business, where the category manager can go back to the business and say, how many users do you really expect? Because we have to declare our rebalancing usage, by August 31st, as an example.
Yeah.
But yeah, performance, everyone looks at SLAs. Of course, that's where they first go, and they'll look at any type of remedies with breach and things like that. But there's so many different critical business terms. And the rebalance is not a legal term. It's a business term.
Yeah.
Or termination in favor. And then you get into things like chronic unavailability, where you get into the legal side of it. But those are the types of terms that you need to measure the performance of the contract you signed before. So I want to ask someone behind the screen here to show something real quick. It's called the Supplier Stability Index. So you have the mega suppliers today, right? And they all score a 5. There's no risk in doing business with a mega supplier, right? Because some of them have enterprise valuations of $1 trillion or more. But it's really that next level down in the tier 2s, these private equity invested businesses, the ones that are burning through cash, the ones that are coming and knocking at your door and saying, hey, I'm going to give you 30% off, but I need you to prepay for 3 years in advance. That, to me, that's a red light going off. This is scoring that we're doing right now. We're going to be doing in Q4 for our clients in the platform, where they can actually have, to your point, proactive value creation to go back to the business owners or the technical resources and say, hey, just so you know, this supplier, this is the score, Supplier Stability Index score. Let me walk you through this 6 months or a year in advance, where you might want to look at an alternative solution. And oh, by the way, the alternative solutions are these 5 right here that we're going to say. So if you don't like your identity and access management provider today, here's 5 other ones, and this is the type of pricing and economics that we've seen them do.
Yeah, and I think that's compelling for the businesses. And the fact that there's a governance structure here and information and proactive input to the teams who we've talked about already have many challenges. This is continued evolution of moving from transactional to strategic, to guiding our businesses, to making sure we are ensuring, continuity of supply, no disruptions, and an overall risk management framework is what is, it's completely beneficial and in alignment with where we want to take procurement for the future.
Yeah, good. Thank you. You can take the slide down, please. So we've got a few minutes here. We've got 5 minutes left. Let's talk about some challenges that we see out there. Or actually, I think we jumped over audits. I mean, you and I have seen a fair share of audits, whether we're on this side of the table or this side of the table. And, the anxiety level goes through the roof. Somebody gets a letter that they're going to audit you. And it's funny because, we have a bunch of attorneys here at Green Cabbage from some of these mega suppliers. And I ask them the question all the time, how many times is there actually a lawsuit with an audit? How many times is somebody actually sending over with their chief legal officer saying, hey, we're actually filing a lawsuit against the company? And the answer is 0, right? Audits are a compelling event. But we've seen a lot of reduction of headcount here soon. We just saw massive reductions in companies like Cisco, and we can go on and on. And next thing you know, we're starting to see some other letters going out there asking for somebody to run a script and provide information here, Bob. So any comments on audits? I think we're seeing a lot more of them. We have a great partner in Angle Point here that we have a partnership with at Green Cabbage on a software asset management side of it. But Bob, any quick comments on audits?
Yeah, what I'd say to you is, given the trajectory of legislation from different countries and in different facets, from cybersecurity to ESG to diversity to inclusiveness, I mean, it's crazy. So there are all of these data protection, there are all of these, and you referred to earlier, geos, countries, putting out laws, controlling what is being done by companies, putting all these requirements in. It's absolutely critical that we are prepared, and that people need to understand, the companies need to understand, to have a management system in place, how to respond to these audits, because they ain't going away, Eric. They're getting more and more of them. They're going to become more pervasive. So companies need to address that, and they need to address it in a very constructive, logical way. Otherwise, they're going to pay a lot of penalties. And we've seen that in the news. I won't comment on the penalties that have been paid, but some of these penalties are massive. And so your platform, the enablement, the advisors, how to handle these audits, how to take, and answer all the questions and what's out there is absolutely critical value and leverage that we can bring to those companies.
Well said. I think the biggest thing with audits is the longer you wait to escalate executive to executive, the more anxiety you're going to have. And we're seeing them. We had an event and we went around the room. It was last week, and we asked a lot of chief procurement officers, how many of you guys are currently in an audit? Every hand was up. How many of you have more than one audit, more than 5 audits, more than 10 audits? And it's a very it's really difficult to go and align with your financial partner what you're asking them for next year for OPEX or CAPEX. Most of the time it's OPEX, right? So, but it's leverage for the supplier. So the supplier is going to say, well, okay, you owe us this. I need you to buy this other product. This goes away. There's just all these little, I'll call them leverage for the supplier. So having a good partner for that is definitely going to be worth the investment you have there. Bob, we've got about a minute left. Any advice that you would give to a new up-and-coming CPO?
To a new up-and-coming CPO, talk to your team, get input, build relationships with your suppliers. They're absolutely critical. Make sure you've got competitive information. Market intelligence is out there. Use it. And what I would say is have fun. We all only get one life. Have fun. And people who are generally having fun are usually much more victorious in whatever that they do. Be enthusiastic, listen to the team, and leverage the partnership net. There's so much information and data around. We can't do everything ourselves. Leverage partnerships, build innovation, and build empowerment with your teams, and use these partners as best you can do.
Yeah. One thing that Bob said, I want to remind everybody, have a relationship with your suppliers. No one likes to be called a vendor, and no one likes to be called an IT salesperson. They're technology salespeople, and they're not vendors, they're suppliers. And having that relationship goes a long way. And we see too many times where there's too much of this. Having that relationship is only going to help as well too. But Bob, listen, I want to thank you for jumping on here, chopping up session with me. You've been very helpful to Green Cabbage and the people here at Green Cabbage, and kind of broadening how we think, and having folks like you on our board of directors is certainly invaluable. If you want to learn more about Green Cabbage, I think you know how to get a hold of us. You can go to the website. If you want to see the supplier stability index, more details on that. And our platform, we talked about AI. Our entire platform is built around AI, so we can give you a demo of that as well too. But
Yeah,
Bob,
Eric, I'd just say if any questions that anyone has on the call here, just drop us a note. I'm on LinkedIn, you're on LinkedIn. Happy to engage with anyone about any questions. This subject in procurement, I mean, when I'm an engineer, I told you that when the first time I got involved in procurement, I'm like, hey, this is really interesting. This was about 3 decades ago. And, my first day in procurement was so enervating, energizing, that I'm like, I want to be a CPO. It is a fascinating area. So procurement, this is where the action is. And this is where the action is going to continue to grow. And so you're in the right area, have fun, and good luck.
love it. Love the energy. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, the audience. And we look forward to our next Chopping It Up session. Have a great day.